Open your fridge right now. Go ahead. There is almost certainly something in there. Leftovers from last night, maybe. Something you bought and haven't touched yet. A drink, at minimum. You probably didn't think about that fridge once today. It just sits there, quietly solving the oldest problem your species has ever faced, and you walk past it a dozen times without noticing. Now, imagine it gone. Not just the fridge, the supermarket, the delivery app, the restaurant on the corner, the entire infrastructure of food that surrounds you so completely that you have stopped being able to see it. What would you actually do? Not in a movie, not with a survival kit. What would your body do on day 3 when the hunger stopped feeling like discomfort and started feeling like something else entirely? That question is the one your ancestors had to answer, for real, with no backup, for almost all of human history. And the way they answered it is one of the most extraordinary survival stories ever told. The easy assumption is that ancient humans were constantly on the edge of starvation. That famine was a permanent condition, a background noise of the prehistoric world that never stopped. That every day was a desperate race to eat before the darkness closed in. That assumption is partly right, but it misses something essential. Something that researchers who actually study these populations have found again and again in the bones, in the teeth, in the physical evidence left behind by people who survived things that should have killed them. Ancient humans didn't just endure famine. They had strategies for it. Complex, sophisticated, layered strategies that took generations to build and refine, and that worked well enough to keep the species alive through ice ages, droughts, volcanic winters, and conditions that make a bad week at your local grocery store look like nothing at all. So how did they actually do it? The answer starts in a place most people never think about: the body itself. Your body right now is carrying approximately 30 days of stored energy in its fat tissue. That number surprises most people. 30 days. Not 3. Not 10. 30 if you are doing very little physical work. Less if you are moving hard every day as your ancestors were, but still far more than most people intuitively feel when they are hungry. The evolutionary anthropologist Hermann Ponzer spent years studying the energy budgets of modern hunter-gatherer populations, tracking how much they burned, how much they stored, and how their bodies responded to periods of scarcity. What he found challenged almost everything the popular fitness world believes about metabolism. The human body doesn't panic during food scarcity. It negotiates. It recalibrates. It quietly lowers its metabolic rate, reduces energy expenditure in systems that aren't immediately critical, and begins drawing on stored reserves in a carefully managed sequence designed to keep the brain and vital organs functioning for as long as possible. You are not built for feast or famine as a crisis. You are built for feast and famine as a normal, recurring cycle, one your body has been managing for hundreds of thousands of years. This physiological flexibility shows up in other ways too. Your liver can convert stored fat into ketone bodies, an alternative fuel source that the brain can run on when glucose from food is unavailable. Your kidneys adjust to conserve water and electrolytes more aggressively during food scarcity. Your sleep patterns shift during famine periods, with lighter sleep that keeps you more alert to opportunity. None of these responses were designed by doctors or nutritionists. They were shaped by millions of years of selection pressure in exactly the environments your ancestors faced. The body you live in is not an unadapted modern body struggling with ancient problems. It is an ancient body exquisitely adapted to exactly those problems, now living in conditions of abundance it was never designed to expect. But the body alone was never enough. What made ancient humans genuinely remarkable at surviving food scarcity wasn't just their physiology, it was their knowledge. The archaeologist and ethnobotanist Kat Anderson spent decades documenting the botanical knowledge of indigenous hunter-gatherer communities in North America, and the depth of what she found is almost impossible to overstate. These communities didn't just know which plants were edible. They knew which parts of which plants, at which time of year, prepared in which specific way, yielded the most nutrition for the least energy spent acquiring it. They knew which roots stored the most starch through winter. They knew which bark could be scraped and boiled into a survival paste when nothing else was available. They knew which insects were high in fat and protein, and which seasons brought them in harvestable quantities. They knew which animal bones, cracked and boiled for hours, would release enough marrow to sustain a person for another day. This wasn't guesswork accumulated over a single lifetime. This was a library. A survival library built across thousands of years, stored not in books but in people, passed from elder to child through demonstration and story and the slow accumulation of practice across generations. And when even that knowledge was pushed to its limits, ancient humans did something that required a different kind of intelligence entirely. They shared. The anthropologist Kim Hill spent decades studying the Ache people of Paraguay, one of the most extensively documented hunter-gatherer populations in the world, and one of his most consistent findings was the mechanics of food sharing during scarcity. When a hunter returned to camp with meat, it didn't belong to him. It belonged, by deeply ingrained social rule, to the group. The best cuts went to the elderly, to nursing mothers, to the sick. The hunter himself often ate last, or near last. This wasn't altruism in the modern sense. It was a technology. A social technology for distributing scarce resources across the maximum number of bodies in a way that kept the most people functional for the longest possible time. A hungry hunter who eats tomorrow can hunt again the day after. A group of people who pool their food make it further than any individual among them could alone. This sharing extended beyond food itself. During extended periods of scarcity, bands would split and spread across a wider territory, each smaller group covering a larger range, and then reconnect when conditions improved. The anthropologist Robert Kelly, who has spent his career studying hunter-gatherer land use patterns, found that this territorial flexibility was one of the primary mechanisms through which prehistoric populations survived regional food failures. They didn't stay in one place and wait. They moved. They recalculated. They used accumulated knowledge of the landscape to find the pockets where food still existed, following seasonal migrations of animals, tracking the movement of fruiting trees, reading the landscape with a precision that took generations of accumulated observation to develop. Kelly's research also documented something even more striking: the existence of what he called social storage, a system in which relationships with distant groups functioned as a kind of insurance policy. A band that shared meat generously with a neighboring group during abundance was accumulating a social debt that could be called in during a period of local scarcity. These relationships, maintained through regular visits, gift exchange, and intermarriage, created a network of reciprocal obligation that extended the effective food security of any single band far beyond what the local landscape could provide on its own. And when movement wasn't possible or wasn't enough, ancient humans did something else. They changed what they were willing to eat. The zoo archaeologist Richard Marlar has studied the dietary evidence from famine periods in prehistoric populations, and the findings are sobering. During severe, extended food scarcity, ancient humans consumed things they would not touch under normal circumstances. Insects, lichen, the inner bark of trees, roots that were bitter and required hours of processing to make edible. Evidence from multiple archaeological sites suggests that bone marrow extraction, the cracking and boiling of bones left over from a previous meal to extract every remaining calorie, became more intensive during periods of environmental stress. Every part of every animal was used. Nothing was discarded that could yield energy. The nutritional flexibility of ancient humans during famine wasn't desperation. It was expertise applied under pressure. There is something else in the archaeological record that speaks to what happened psychologically during these periods. The rock art, the cave paintings, the ritual objects found at sites associated with periods of known environmental stress. Many researchers have noted that symbolic and ritual activity seems to increase during these periods rather than decrease. The archaeologist Ian Davidson has written about the relationship between resource stress and symbolic intensification in prehistoric communities, arguing that ritual, story, and shared symbolic activity served a function during famine that was more than spiritual. It held the group together. It provided a shared framework for making sense of suffering and for coordinating the behaviors that survival required. The fire that burned at the center of the group during a 3-week famine wasn't just warming bodies. It was doing something to minds, reinforcing the social bonds that kept the sharing system intact under the pressure of genuine deprivation, when every individual instinct in every hungry person in that circle was pulling toward taking more than the rules allowed. The group that held together through famine survived it more often than the group that didn't. That is not sentiment. That is selection pressure applied across hundreds of thousands of years, producing the species that eventually walked out of the last ice age, figured out how to grow its own food, built cities, and then built refrigerators to put in the kitchens of those cities so that the oldest problem the species ever faced would quietly solve itself while nobody was paying attention. Open your fridge again. Something is in there. You didn't earn it through a week of tracking knowledge built across generations. You didn't negotiate territorial boundaries with neighboring groups to access it. You didn't crack bones for 3 hours to extract the last calories from an animal your band hunted 12 days ago. You didn't hold a group together through 3 weeks of hunger by sitting around a fire and telling stories until the sharing rules held firm and everyone made it to morning. It is just there, quietly, waiting. And the reason your body lets you walk past it without panic, the reason you are capable of forgetting about food for hours at a time, is that somewhere deep in your physiology and somewhere deep in the social instincts you carry without knowing they are there, sits 30,000 years of very hard-won expertise at surviving the moments when it wasn't.